We are returning to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 1 through 9, and then skipping over to verses 18 through 23. The section that is left out, this verses 10 through 17, interestingly enough, right in the middle, the lectionary leaves it out, is actually the section that where Jesus actually says why he teaches in parables, which is the question most people have. Why does he teach in parables? Is the question that his disciples had too. Why do you teach in parables? Why not just say what you mean? But we're not going to answer that today. But listen, maybe we will. Listen to the words, to the parables. It's chapter 13, verses 1 through 9, and then skipping to 18 through 23. Okay? That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." And then skipping down to verse 18. "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, in another 30. May the hearing of these words add insight and blessing to your lives." Jesus says he teaches in parables because people don't listen. So essentially, it's like people don't really listen. They don't really strive to hear. So you can spoon feed it and give it straight out, and people still won't really pay attention or hear. So in the parable format, then it allows them to enter the story and find their place, and kind of have to dig around and search for the meaning. You have to work for it. And if you don't work for it, then it's evident that you're really not listening or you don't really care, right? Jesus teaching in parables. I have noticed in my work at the hospital that it's so clear. This parable really comes to life in a way that it doesn't for me in other ways. it's in that setting of working with patients sometimes in the hardest, most difficult times of their lives that it really becomes clear. For example, I work with people often. I hear often in the hospital. I hear it not just in the hospital, but especially in the hospital. I see people who just are really in despair and distraught over the world, right? They can look out and they just can point their finger at everything that is wrong in the world, in society, and it just disheartens them and it kind of hardens them, and they get kind of, there's just the spirit about it. There's just such despair and they're so distraught. And then they often, what I see is that these are folks who really cling to and look towards others, people in power, they're really drawn to people in power who kind of align with that fear and despair that they have going on, which doesn't really help them feel better or find peace. And that's what I've noticed, that there's not a sense of peace within them. And often what I find is that these are the folks, when they go, I worry the most for them when they're facing surgery, when they're in the middle of a very serious disease. You can see that they don't heal. Their body doesn't even heal. Like it's their mind, their body follows the mind. There's such fear and anxiety, and things go wrong more often. Not that things don't go wrong or things happen to anybody, but especially in these cases, I just see that they cling to the ways of the world and they despair so greatly over it. You know, it's easy to get caught up in that. You don't have to be sick to do this. It's easy to get caught up in that. It's that when you can stand back and just point out everything that's wrong, everything that's wrong, everything that's broken, but you don't bring any hope, any solution to the table, any sense of, gosh, I might not be able to fix the world, but maybe I could live in the present and bring some, you know, you probably know people like this, just can point out everything that's wrong and despair, and then be drawn from their own fear into the sources of power in the world that are more destructive. Or then I can meet people who you can just tell they have good reason to despair. There's all kinds of stuff going on in their life, but they just seem so centered and calm. And whatever disease they're battling or whatever affliction they may have in the hospital, that doesn't become the issue. They're able to be at peace with whatever. They have this sense of peace. And that is a peace that then gets sort of transferred to their caregivers and to people that encounter them. There's just this pleasant energy and there's this peace. You can see these things. My question for you, this is an invitation today. Jesus is giving you. You are part of the crowds. You're gathered. You're the crowd. And Jesus is issuing an invitation to you to listen, to see. Open your ears to see beyond. Remember that movie? I'm going to probably show my age. Remember that movie, Patch Adams, came out? I think I was a younger person. And there was this scene in the movie. It was about the doctor who did clowning in the hospital. It was kind of controversial, but and there's this scene I remember, it stuck with me, where he says, you know, to somebody who was going, I don't know why you do this. It's crazy. And he held up his hand, held up his fingers, and he said, what do you see? And the person said, well, I see your thumb and your finger. And he goes, no, you know what I see? He's like, look through it. Look beyond it. I see whatever's beyond that. You're looking just at this, but I'm seeing this. You have to look at the possibility. You have to look beyond just what is in front of you. That's the invitation. Jesus is inviting you to look beyond, to make a deeper connection with God, to live in the realm, to allow the realm of God to be within you. So that's the choice you have. That's the parable. What are you going to do? What are you going to choose? Who are you going to be? You're going to be rocky ground. You're going to be shallow ground. You're going to be that's the choice. And that's all I'm going to say about parables today. You get to choose, so go choose. What I really want to talk about is this little bit at the beginning. I'm very interested in this little bit at the beginning where Jesus, again, the crowds are surrounding him, crowds of people. And what does he do? He gets into a boat and he paddles out into the water. It's just a little benign opening to this, right? We just pass that over because we're just we allowed it to set the scene, and then we are like, what do these parables mean? And the parables are easy, really, if you just, open your ears and your eyes, and you just get to choose what kind of ground are you going to be. And if you're rough soil and you're rocky ground, then what do you got to do to till that and break that up in your life? What do you need to add to the soil to get yourself more ready to really receive God? But Jesus gets in a boat, and I don't think we should overlook this. Jesus gets in a boat and moves out away from the crowds. This is all fascinating to me because we are so obsessed in our way of thinking with numbers, right? Especially in church. We just love to focus on numbers because the bigger the better, right? If there's more people, then we must be right and we must be doing something right. And if there's fewer people, then who cares? But Jesus repeatedly goes away from the crowds, always disperses the crowds or moves away. So here we have another scene where Jesus gets in a boat. Now really pay attention to that. If you haven't heard this before, this will be good information. And if you've heard this before, pay attention. Listen again. Anytime in the Gospels, a boat appears, what does the boat represent? The church. Anytime, almost anytime. And almost always when we see Jesus get into a boat, it's a symbol for church. Not in the first century kind of church. I mean, they didn't have church like we have. But think of, I'm going to use church because that's our term. Almost always when Jesus gets in a boat, think back what you know about the Gospels and Jesus in boats. There's a storm, right? It's rough waters. There's despair. The disciples, they sink back into despair and become disheartened after the crucifixion, right? And they get into the boat and they take the boat out and it's just, like trying to go back to the way it was, trying to go back to how things always are, and it's not working, and they're really sad until Jesus shows up again, right? They invite Jesus back into the boat. But here we have this scene where Jesus gets into the boat to kind of get away from the crowds. Now, if you watch the History Channel, you might have heard some theories around maybe Jesus got into the boat because it's like this brilliant first century amplification process, right? He can get into the boat and get away, and the water amplifies his voice so he can speak to the crowds more. That's a theory. Could be true. It's not the point, though, because Jesus teaches in parables, so there's more to it than that. Jesus gets into a boat, and he goes out onto the water. Now, what do we know about water in the Gospels? When we talk about the Sea of Galilee, or he's always out on the water, the body of water, always represents, in first century thinking, it's a danger. That's where the dangerous things in life are lurking. right? Leviathan and the sea monsters and chaos and all the tough stuff. Jesus gets into a boat and he goes out into the water. He takes the boat into the water, out into the water, away from the crowds, to teach in parables, because he says in verses 10 through 17, they won't listen. I teach in parables because they don't really listen. And he refers back to Isaiah. I'm going to make them work for it. I want them to work for it. I want them to think. They're going to get it or they're not going to get it. Why am I telling you this? Most of the commentaries you read won't point out this in this particular text. They're going to focus on the parables, right? Because I think in the time that we are living and we as a church are living, we should be paying attention to some of this. Because really, Jesus has always asked of us to be committed in a way that feels rather dangerous in a world where our power structure is structured around numbers, around capitalism, around how much you have, about greed, about getting over and ahead of somebody else, about having power over, about dominating. Jesus has always asked us being church, because we as church claim to be followers of Jesus. So the way that we must follow is always through the water. Right? You take the boat into the water. The church must go into the dangerous, risky places where no one else would think to go or want to go. Even the crowd, they follow him and they put their ties. Imagine the crowd just standing there on the beach. Like, well, we're not going to go there. We're very curious what you have to say, sir. But we're not going to get in a boat and come out there with you. They could. Why not? But there were a lot of boats around. There are a lot of boats around. So really the question for us today is not, it's more than just what soil you're going to be, what soil are you. That's important. You should tend to that. You need to think about that in your own life. Where are you in that? Absolutely. You got to figure this out. If you're going to live in the way, walk in the way, really listen and learn in the way, if you're going to receive the word and really truly live it, you got to know what soil you are. How are you really receiving the seeds? Do you run at the first sign of trouble? Are you distraught and fearful? Are you living and operating out of fear and reacting always out of fear? It's not good enough, that things aren't right, must be. Is it just great and joyful when things go well, but first sign of trouble? You got to figure that out. Are you balanced? Can you live with this balance between understanding that we live in a broken world and things are not perfect, and we can see all the ways that they are not perfect and all the problems. We can see that. But we're going to be balanced in how we react to that. We're going to respond to that from a place of love. We're going to respond to the brokenness from remembering who we are called to be in the kingdom of God. How will we respond as a church to the needs of the world? Because it's risky. The waters are really risky. Sometimes they seem calm, but there's always risk to live and to take this message out into the world, this world that doesn't want to believe that God loves everybody, doesn't want to believe in the beauty of diversity and creation. We don't even care as a world, do we? Yesterday we recorded the hottest day ever recorded on Earth. Heat is just rising. We don't even want to care that much. where will you be? How will we as a church react? Will we risk going into the water to share this good news that is challenging and counter to what the world tells us, to what our society tells us, how our society is dividing up? Are we willing to risk it? Are we willing to be comfortable in the uncomfortableness of knowing that a lot of people would prefer the comforts of bigger, comfortable, nicer places? That's it, that's all. Simple. Are you going to get in the boat? In or out, in the boat, or on the shore, letting the seeds bounce off the rocky ground? Choice is yours. Choose well.